Hello. This video is going to be about what is ENM, which is ethical non-monogamy, which I've talked about it before. That is how my marriage with my ex-husband ended. I had to deal with so much nastiness from Pharisees, like religious people, because I was just very open about who I am and my experience. But when you are being a judgmental person and you're being accusatory and calling people by their sin, you're actually working with the enemy. You actually have become a child of Leviathan, a child of pride, and also of the enemy, right? Once you start your whisper campaigns about people, it is what you're doing. You are indulging in witchcraft. And if you go to a place where that is happening, where there's a lot of gossip and slander, you need to leave, because that is a place of witchcraft, pretty much. They have polluted it. So that's pretty much what I had to deal with. So I wanted to explain what it is and how we can treat people better. People involved in ethical non-monogamy are using worldly ethics. They are not a bunch of cheaters. They're not a bunch of monsters, and they're not irredeemable. Jesus' sacrifice was enough to pay for the fornicators and the adulterers, just as much as it was for the drug addicts and the murderers and the thieves. Okay, so I just want to explain a little bit of the mentality. And I also want to draw on some stories of the Bible of how God Himself handled such situations. And yeah, so ethical non-monogamy uses worldly secular ethics, where the way that I had it was my ex-husband came to me and said that we should try it. I had thought about it before, but then he had brought it up, so I was like, okay, I guess we could try it. I was in an ethical non-monogamous marriage for 2 months before my marriage ended, and that's not actually the norm. It's just I did have Christian values at the time, even though I didn't really keep going to church and stuff like that. And even though my ethics were fully compromised, I didn't know how much the values had been instilled in me that I couldn't participate in it. I also had issues that arose when that happened. I realized that I had some codependency issues, and that my marriage was kind of built on the sand. I was the only one. At times I would search for God, and when it would get hard, I just wouldn't. I don't have that problem anymore. I have a problem. I have a partner that seeks God when we have problems. So he asked me for that. He asked me for an ethical non-monogamous relationship, and we dated other people, and then it was just he just walked away, and I told him that I didn't really want to like rekindle anything, because the relationship was just kind of felt kind of dead at the time. I think like having an open marriage was a desperate attempt to fix my marriage. Essentially, I never did anything crazy, and I'm not judging people who did. I never participated in group stuff, group so like activities, if you know what I mean, like threesomes and stuff like that. I didn't participate in that. I just dated other people, and we did start a process of separation. We started a legal separation process, and that was pretty much it. Then after that, I dated somebody that I do regret dating it, but it's actually dating that person to a certain extent. But at the same time, when I talk to other divorcees, um I would say a good portion of them have had the similar experience where after marriage they dated somebody they shouldn't have dated, and then they just kind of had to deal with their problems as to why their marriage ended and why they had dated somebody that was not healthy. And the reality for me was like I really just wanted to feel alive, because I felt really dead in my marriage. So I just dated somebody younger, a few years younger, and it lasted about a little bit longer than a year. I would say a little bit closer to 2 years. And then literally like 2 months after that, I met my now partner, who did bring me closer to the Lord. We just didn't have conviction about any of the sexual sins as far as immorality, fornication, or anything like that. Um, I've said it before, it's because of how I was raised. Also with ethical non-monogamy, not that I experienced that with this partner, but with my other partner, there's like rules, right? So the rules are essentially you either tell each other everything or you tell each other nothing. But there's that agreement. We were on the line of like, we don't tell each other nothing, because I didn't want to know and he didn't want to know. But it's inevitable because you live together. I had a lot of friends at the time who were participating in that, and it actually worked for them. But it would just bring some problems, But I didn't really know a marriage that didn't have problems. But they were just a lot stronger than us, to be honest. Their marriage was just stronger than us, because they would have some jealousy issues and then they'd be like fine. So it does work for some people. It is what it is. And when you read the Bible, God doesn't actually, I am not gonna sit here and advocate for it, but I'm gonna say when you do read the Bible, God doesn't dishonor the people that are participating in that. And it's not just that, but even if you do commit any type of sexual sin, like, you can be forgiven. Like, you can. And you don't have to wear your sin on your forehead or anything like that. So the ones I did was essentially, the first one I wrote down was a story in Genesis where so Hagar is the concubine, and the Lord does meet her and multiplies her descendants, but it didn't disqualify her from hearing the voice of God. I had somebody tell me that because I was living in sin, I wasn't hearing the voice of God, but I was hearing the voice of demons, and I was like, okay, well, there's that. But it's actually not true. God will seek you out even if you're living in sin. God will seek you out because he wants to pull you away from that, right? And Hagar wasn't living in sin. She was just living in a situation. A lot of people are just living in situations. But yeah, so God still approached her and comforted her, and that's ENM. For me, that's ENM. They were in an ethical, non-monogamous relationship, and it was not working out for them at all. But God he didn't give them the silent treatment. And then John 4, so Jesus meets a woman at a well who had 5 husbands, and she was living with one. And that story is in John. And Jesus comes to her directly and lets her know that, pretty much gives her the gospel and lets her know that soon it won't just be the Jews that are worshiping God, but it will be anybody who has it in their heart and in their spirit, because God is spirit and he wants us to worship him in spirit. And that was a Samaritan woman that, she was just frowned upon for both being a Samaritan woman and for being unmarried and for, having multiple partners. And I can only imagine that she probably did that as a way to survive. And Jesus didn't condemn her at all. And he didn't label her an adulteress or tell her that she was disqualified from speaking to him or from hearing his voice. And in Genesis, there's another story with Rachel and Leah, and God noticed that he had that Rachel was favored over Leah. So what he did is he closed Rachel's womb, which was the second wife, ironically, and he opened up the womb of Leah. And in the Bible, it does talk about a lot about that, about God listening to the wailing woman, if you will. Then there's also John 7, where and I've talked about that before, about the casting of stones. And that is when Jesus steps in and stops people, the angry mob, from stoning a woman to death. So he kept them from murder, and he kept her from being murdered. And just so you know, those stones are Satan's stones. So every time that you're being a judgmental individual, labeling people that, may be struggling or got out of a certain lifestyle, that's what you're doing. You're pretty much a minion for the enemy. It's very common too. And then I did want to bring up Samson and Delilah, because we read the story of Samson and Delilah, although he was fornicating, God never took his gift away from him. The one who took his gift away from him was actually Delilah. So when he did sin, he just opened up the door to the enemy. It's what he did. But at the end of the day, when he cried out, God still gave him a victory. So if you have been in any type of sin like that, like, God can still give you the victory and you're still forgivable. There's many more examples. There's also the story of Tamar, right? So who she had to disguise herself as a prostitute so she could sleep with Judah, I believe, and pretty much reclaim her inheritance. So yeah. So nobody really, God didn't say to any of those people, because of this sin that you committed, you can't hear my voice. Because of this sin you committed, you're unforgivable. The blood of Christ isn't enough. None of that. Like I said, I'm not telling people to to participate in any ENM activity. It's more of like, how are we treating people that are walking away from a certain lifestyle? How would God treat them? How would Jesus treat them?